Hi FIUpians, today I talk with Daniel, a member of our community, about cryptocurrencies and in particular Bitcoin. While you might not want to employ crypto to achieve your financial independence goals, as it's harder to predict the results compared to a diversified ETF portfolio, some people already made a small fortune with their early crypto adoption and knocking at the door of family offices asking for help to preserve their new wealth and transition to a more conservative and diversified approach. This is the first part of 2 episodes that is focusing more on what money is, how banks work with your money, how inflation works, and it affects your financial independence plans. We think it's important to understand the impact of the new types of money that currently emerge. Hello, everybody, to another episode of the FI Europe podcast. Today with me is David. Hi, David.
Hi.
And David is somebody out of our community who actually replied to the last newsletter, and he digged kind of deep into the crypto space and has a lot of made a lot of thoughts about the monetary system, and that's why I invited him to record an episode with me and share his thoughts. And I mean, why inviting crypto gurus from YouTube when we have also experts in our community? So let's start. First of all, maybe David, tell us a little bit, because I also think maybe your personal story is also interesting for the community. So you're kind of living in Germany, you mentioned.
I do.
And you come from where?
I come from Spain. My name is David, 30 years old. I come from Spain, but I'm living as an expat in the south of Germany, in Stuttgart, for almost 8 years already. I came in the year 2013 for an Erasmus, and I ended up staying here. I'm a mechanical engineer myself. I have been working for Mercedes-Benz in the last 6 years. And very recently, I had the honor to do a career switch. And since 1st of April, I'm working for Tesla. And me, myself, of course, together with my wife, we discovered the whole FIRE movement and the concepts around 2 years ago. And I would say we are seriously into it and then pursuing this goal in our life also around about 2 years. And that's why I have also been following you and your podcast for a while.
Very good. It's an honor. And do you like Spätzle? Because that's what people eat in South Germany.
I'm not a big fan of pasta in general, and I must say also not the biggest fan of German cuisine. Sorry. But I come from Spain that has very high standards. It's very difficult for me to travel to a new country and say this food is better than what I know home.
Yes. You have
nothing against Germany.
Very, very nice cuisine in Spain. Also a bit meat heavy, I guess. Also.
Yeah, it depends. But yes, could be.
All right. So, and what's your maybe just very brief? What's your take on financial independence? Well, how do you plan to go FI in a nutshell?
Well, so my whole FI learning process started pretty much like in the classical way. I read your Money or Your Life. Amazing book. I find most of the principles in that book still apply today. The typical formula: earn as much as you can, know what you are spending, spend as little as you can, and invest the difference. The part of that book that, in my point of view, is very outdated is the last chapter, the one about invest the difference. At the time Your Money or Your Life was written, it was possible to just buy bonds and ensure a lifelong income out of that. That's obviously for very long not anymore the case. A little bit more modern approach of the FIRE methodology is to just invest the difference in an index ETF, which, in my opinion, still could work. But I drive a little bit more innovative approach to FIRE, where I try to earn as much as I can, spend as little as possible, allocate a portion of the difference in a good form of money, and then invest in ETFs what is left. And this middle step of allocating a portion of my savings rate monthly to a better form of money it's what we will most of all be talking about today. Because
Exactly.
the point I want to make in today's interview is that choosing your form of money is the most influential factor in the time it takes to achieve financial independence.
Interesting headline. So let's then dive directly into the topic. You also learned in the recent months or years, you also learned about the concept of money, what it means, what technology is behind that, and why we kind of using it. So what can you tell me a bit about where money comes from, when did it begin, and how it then leads now to kind of the disruption in the field right now? So why, for example, why is now this whole cryptocurrency stuff? Why now?
Sure, we can dive there. I think one of very uncomfortable questions that any child can ask his father or his mother is, "Mom or Dad, what is money?" Every person in the audience can ask himself, if your child or your niece, if you don't have a child, would ask you, "What is money?" How would explain that? How would you explain that to a 10-year-old?
Let me try.
You can try it. Yes. Okay. Go on.
I say money. Or explain it to my son. Money is something that you can kind of give in return if you want to get a certain good of somebody. So if you want to buy a coffee, and then you can give money to get the coffee. But in earlier times, people had no money, and then they would just offer something else in return of the coffee. So you could say, okay, the bakery, the guy in the bakery, he wants to get like maybe some flowers. And then you could say, okay, I'm giving some flowers and I get in return the coffee. So maybe if you only have, for example, shares, if you only have shares, but you want a coffee, but the guy from the bakery only wants to have flowers, then you need a form of, you need something in between. So that you can first of all sell the share to somebody who wants shares. Then you get some value where the value is stored, and then you can go to the bakery and or you can go to the flower shop, buy some flowers. Okay, it's very difficult. It's not. I was close, but I messed it up.
It's not bad. You go on the right way. But you get my point. Like most people don't really think much about what money is or how it works, because it's money is really this intersection between engineering and economics. Money is a technology, and it's so deeply embedded in our culture that it has become completely invisible to most of us. In fact, we don't even think about it in most cases unless it stops working. Of course, when money stops working, then people, it's all they think about. And in the end, money is a technology that has a purpose. Like you said, in earlier times, people were transacting only through barter. What you have described, basically a person produces something good and only that good, and exchanging it with somebody else who produces another good that he wants. However, that's a very inefficient way of transacting, which is only through direct transactions, and that works only in very small communities. Money is a technology that emerged naturally, and it enabled individuals to perform an indirect trade, meaning that every person in the society could specialize in a certain good, and then this society would organize the productivity in a complex way. Every member of the society would produce what he or she can produce the best, and through use of money could get everything else that he needs. But this is the thing, that there is no clear border between what is money and what is not. Basically, any good can act as money. There has been many forms of money in humanity's history. From barter, we went to first abstractions of money, which were things like seashells or raised or stones, these huge big stones with a hole in the middle. Then we went to precious metals. Then we evolved to paper money, and nowadays most people use what I call plastic money, which is either credit cards or something like PayPal. PayPal and credit card is essentially the same thing. But there is no clear border what is money and what is not. There is in any context, in any society, money will be the most saleable good that this community has available. Meaning, for example, if in any community the only goods that were available were apples and salt, then this community will naturally tend to use salt for exchanges. Why? Because apples rot and they get spoiled after a certain time. And salt is more sellable than apples, and so on. So any good that is the most sellable in a certain context will act as money for this society. And what I also want to say is there have always been several types of money coexisting at the same time. It's not such that any society has had only one and that's it, except for certain societies, like, for example, in prisons, they transact with cigarettes because they don't have access to much more. But in free societies, there has always been several forms of money coexisting and competing with one another. And no money has ever been the best for all use cases, and also no money has ever been the best forever. Sooner or later, a better, stronger form of money emerged, and other people started using it because it was more saleable.
So that's also what my grandparents are afraid of, because they have seen many currencies leaving and they have been replaced by other currencies. Just at the time of when the new currency arrived, then the converting to the new currency was not optimal.
So exactly. Nothing is forever. To say we have always transacted with this currency, it has never worked. It didn't work when we transacted with shells. And then stones came and the shell user said, but here we prefer shells. Yeah, but if stones are more saleable, soon enough, people will turn to stones.
When did people transact with stones and shells? What was that? How many years ago?
That was around 3000 before Christ.
3000 before Christ. Okay.
People back then transacted with stones, with seashells, with salt. Actually, I don't know if you know it, but the word salary comes from the Latin salario, which is derived from the word salt. Because at that time, people were getting their salaries in salt because it was the most sellable item that they could have access to.
I don't know. So I will continue, just instead of saying salary, I will say salt.
Well, nowadays doesn't work anymore, but I found it very interesting that the word salary derives from the word
It's
salt.
funny. So so the salt survived a long time. So the word.
Yes, salario in Latin meant something like your portion of salt for your wages.
And right now there's another kind of point in history where we also kind of switch again the form how we transact and also store value. So I have the feeling, because otherwise there wouldn't be so many gurus and podcasts and whatever out there, because there is a need for information, a need to navigate the chaotic space, and then also to see what new forms of money and value storage will stay for a while.
Exactly. Yeah, because what I just said, that there has always been different forms of money coexisting, and there has until now always a better one has always come to replace the previous one. That begs the question: what makes a form of money good, or better said, what makes a form of money better?
I researched about it in the morning, because Might talked about it, and I found out that successful currencies have six key attributes: scarcity, divisibility, utility, transportability, durability, and counterfeitability.
Yeah, I was pretty much going to say something like that. Yeah, I will go on that, but I would like to introduce a different structure of those six properties that you mentioned, because what I just said a moment ago is money is the most saleable good that a society has available. But what does it mean, saleable? Money has three dimensions. It has to be saleable across time, meaning it has to enable you to purchase something in the future with whatever you produce today. It has to be saleable across space. It has to enable you to purchase something in another place than where you are right now at this very moment. And it has to be able to be saleable across scales. It means that it has to enable you to gather small bits of your productivity to purchase something bigger, or divide one big bunch of your productivity to purchase something smaller. This is the three problems that money used to solve. The saleability across time means, for example, if you're producing apples, you can sell them only in a very short period of time. You need something that you can use next week. And so it goes with the others. And my point is that these three functions are usually known as, so the saleability across time is usually known as the store of value function of money. The saleability across space is the medium of exchange aspect of money. And the saleability across scales is the unit of account function of money. But these three things, they have a hierarchy. They are not all three the same important. They also don't appear in the same order. So first, a certain good starts to be recognized by people as something that can hold value over time. Maybe in a society where people are transacting only with animals or with apples, people start to realize that salt holds its value over time. And then people start to store their value in salt. Any form of money first becomes store of value. When enough people have stored their value in that, then these market participants that share this assumption now, they start to accept it. They are happy to receive salt in exchange of things. And when they have enough of it, they start to also give it in exchange of the products or services that they want. That means that the second thing that happens is that the form of money becomes a medium of exchange. But this can only happen after it is a store of value. This is the order. And once everybody, as more of this exchange occurs, and it's used widely by every participant in this society, then people start denominating their things using grams of salt. And then is when this form of money becomes a unit of account, which can happen only after it has become a medium of exchange. So basically, the properties of money, they are like a house, Store of value is the foundation of the house. Medium of exchange is like the walls and the columns. And unit of account is the ceiling of the house. You cannot have a good ceiling in your house if your foundation is weak. And the same, cannot build nice walls if you don't have a good foundation. And you cannot put a good ceiling if your walls are not yet built. In the same way, no form of money can be a good unit of account without being a broadly used medium of exchange before. And no form of money can be a broad medium of exchange without being an accepted store of value.
Can you explain again this unit of account? How does it work with salt?
Yeah. So unit of account means that it is used as a common unit of measurement to determine the market value of goods and services. It's a step when people are not only accepting salt in exchange for the goods and services, meaning as a medium of exchange, but they start to price their shoes in salt. They start to price their steak of beef in an amount of salt. It means that it also solves the problem of cross prices, because imagine a society where people produce 10 different products. Yeah. And if you didn't have this unit of account, you would have to know the price of your product measured in the other 9. And that's a complete chaos.
It's a kind of a common language then. So exactly. If I would go, I would like to get the bread for 2 chocolates, and somebody else will say, okay, I would like to get the bread for 100 apples. Yeah. Then it's hard to convert. So
exactly, that's the point.
Calculator.
Or a very good head back then. Imagine that back then they didn't have calculators, they didn't have computers.
Yes. So,
yeah. So the properties that you mentioned, they are also related to a concrete property, to the concrete dimension. So, for example, to be a good store of value, a form of money has to have scarcity and durability. It means scarcity means it has to be limited in supply relative to other goods. And durability means that it can be used repeatedly. without losing functionality, meaning that it doesn't rot, it doesn't spoil.
But can't you just go to the sea and get more salt instead of working and producing apples? You can just go to the sea and produce more, mine more salt.
That's a really good question, Matthias. You can today, but back then they couldn't. Back then they didn't know how to extract salt from the sea. They only knew how to mine salt from the earth. And because mining salt from the earth was very hard, salt was very scarce. And that's why salt was a very good form of money, because it was very scarce and it had a very good store of value properties. Once humanity discovered how to extract salt from the sea, then this salt was not scarce anymore. And it therefore, that's why we don't transact with salt today, because it would still be an amazing unit of account and an amazing medium of exchange. But salt is not a store of value anymore. The foundations of the house of money of salt crumbled and it whole collapsed.
How do you pay with salt when it rains? So because of the utility and transportability and so on.
Well, you can protect it from the weather. Back then it was a better problem to have than transacting with something that rottens. So my point is, salt is a very good example to show how when some technological change happens, like discovering a method of extraction of salt from the sea, then the form of money loses the property of scarcity. And if the form of money loses the property of scarcity, it loses its status as money. It cannot be used any longer. The foundation is not there anymore.
Also, sometimes people paid in horses, but horses they are aging, so they're losing in value.
Well, there are many things that were used in historical times, but at a certain time, people switched to metals, for example, and then after metals, then we went to paper money and so on. Every evolution has been better than the other in a way. And to continue maybe with the properties, what you mentioned, acceptability and portability. Acceptability being that is used by others and accepted widely, and portability that is easily moved across distances. That makes a form of money a good medium of exchange. And
so that's
lastly,
also the problem with gold, because you cannot send gold very easy from London to Berlin.
Exactly. But there was a time when nobody could send money over the internet because there was no internet. So that didn't seem to be a marking distinction.
The internet wasn't there all the time?
No, it wasn't, unfortunately not.
Okay.
Yeah. And last but not least, there is a unit of account, just to have it mentioned. Divisibility belongs to the properties that make a form of money a good unit of account that is easily divided into smaller units or grouped into bigger units. And there is another quality that's called fungibility. Most people have never heard this word. It just means that one unit is exactly the same as any other. Basically, that 1 kilogram of salt is the same good as any other kilogram of salt. But there is no good salt and bad salt, because if there was good salt and bad salt, then you could not exchange one for the other. And that's what fungibility means. Our euros are fungible to a certain extent. There could be some argument whether €1 in paper is the same as €1 online. They have different properties, so they are not really the same. But if a form of money is not fungible, then it cannot act as a unit of account because the units are not the same.
And back then, who issued salt? Because now we have the central banks who are kind of sending their money to the banks, and the banks are sending it to the end users or people.
That's the beauty of money in a free market, that nobody has to issue it. There were no banks back then. There were no central banks, of course, but there were no banks at all. People would obtain salt in exchange for their goods and services, and then exchange it for other goods and services. Similar thing happened with gold. There was nobody issuing gold until the first empires, like the Roman Empire, starting to make coins out of it with the face of the emperor, and that's what would mark a true coin. This is a very good point, which actually I wanted to round this description of the 6 properties with. Any good that has any grade of these 6 properties can be used as money. And goods that excel in all 6 are most likely to be chosen as money. And what is very important to understand is that money does not need to be backed by anything. Money only needs to have these properties. Anything that has these properties can be money. There are certain things that will have these properties only if they are backed by other things. But this is not a requirement. Anything that has these properties can be money, and it doesn't need to be backed by anything. Paper money, as we know it today, we say, well, but paper money is backed by the government. And of course that's necessary, because paper by itself, paper is not scarce. Paper is not durable. Paper is not acceptable. It's only acceptable if it has the name of the government written on it. It's only scarce if you trust your government to produce a limited amount of it. That's why you accept from me a 10 euro banknote, but you would never accept from me a piece of paper where I have written 10 euros by hand. That's why paper money needs to be backed, because paper is not scarce. But if you are using something that by itself it's scarce, you don't need it to be backed by anything because it already has these properties.
So you say, I trust the government more than I trust you?
I certainly hope so.
Okay.
The point being, to summarize it, money does not need to be backed by anything. It just needs to have these properties.
So some of the attributes of money was better in the times of salt because it was decentralized and it wasn't
different. Let's say it like that. It was different.
But right, somehow in the history, money was centralized, and they created the central banks, which is kind of a platform. And we have a kind of platform lock-in and one centralized unit who is making decisions and so on. So, and now there could be also an opportunity to change that. I'm not sure if that will work, because they have, so also central banks have a certain power to move things into the direction they want.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about that transition. So we talk quite a bit about primitive forms of money. At some point, humanity switched to the natural choice, which was precious metals, gold and silver and so on. But like you said, gold is not really good to transport, and it's also not very divisible. That's why people started to, or businesses started to emerge where people would store their gold. And this business would give the person a certificate for a certain amount of gold. And then this person could use this certificate to transact with others. It was essentially a piece of paper, but this piece of paper gave the owner the right to redeem it for gold. And that's why, even if it was just a piece of paper, it inherited the scarcity of gold. And these private businesses, these private warehouses where people would store their gold and then exchange it for certificates, they started to converge into the primitive forms of banks. Private banks back then, for mostly run by big families. Like most people have heard about the Medici in Florence. They were not a state or anything similar to it. They were a private family doing banking functions. And these banks, with time and time, they started to not want to hold gold themselves, because imagine if you read about the Medici in the 15th century, alone in the city of Florence, there were like 10 or 15 different banks for a population of few thousand people. So there were too many banks, and they were too vulnerable, because a family, even if you're a powerful family, you still only have a small castle. And if you start to store too much gold inside, you're going to become very attractive for robbers. So small banks started to think of an idea. What if we had a central warehouse where all of us store our gold? And this is the idea of a central bank. A central bank is a warehouse of gold for the banks. So a person gives the gold to the bank and gets a certificate from the bank, and the bank gives this gold to the central bank and gets another certificate from the central bank. And this is how basically the idea of central banks emerged. And it's in and of itself, it's a good idea. It all became just corrupted the time when the central banks got under the control of the national governments. Because if this central bank was really a truly independent entity, then there is nothing very wrong in that idea, at least in my opinion. But once the central bank comes under government control, then the entity capable of issuing certificates and the entity that can profit from having them issued are very close to one another, are very far from independent. And that's when things start to get a little wrong.
And but it's now it's like that, I would say.
No, definitely it's not like that anymore. There was a fundamental change to the central banking system in 1971 when Richard Nixon suspended the convertibility of the US dollar to gold, because up to that point you had only banknotes, but these banknotes, they really were supposed to be exchangeable by gold. Up to 1971, you were supposed to be able to go to a central bank with a dollar bill and get an equivalent amount of gold. In 1971, basically, the United States had to default on this debt, and they had to say, look, this thing of converting dollars to gold, it's just not going to work anymore. Okay, we're stopping that. But don't worry, the US has a very big military. We have a lot of economical power. We still support the dollar, and your dollar is now not backed by gold anymore. It's now backed by us. And yeah, that's pretty much the birth of the system that we have today. That's the same system we have today with a couple of twists, such as the fractional reserve. But this leads to the current situation today, where let me ask you a question, Matthias. Do you have money in the bank?
No, I have a database entry in the bank.
Perfect answer. Yes, I knew you would get this one right. But 99% of people, if you ask them, do you have money in the bank? They say, of course I have money in the bank. No, that's not true. You don't have money in the bank. I don't have money in the bank. Unless, of course, you have a safe with some cash stored in that. If you have a safe with cash in the bank, then maybe you have money in the bank. But no, what we have is a legal construction through which we have loaned money to the bank. Essentially, when you deposit money in the bank, you are giving a interest-free loan to the bank, and the bank issues debt to you. The bank owes you a certain amount of money, and that's the number you can see in your bank account. And the bank, in exchange, allows you to transfer this debt to another person. So if I buy something from you and I make a bank transaction from my account to your account, essentially, I'm not sending you money. What I'm doing is I'm giving up a little bit of the debt that the bank has with me, and I'm giving this debt to you. And now my bank has this debt to you and not to me. So fiat money, that's how these kind of currencies are called. It's basically, it's a form of debt. When you have a 10 euro banknote in your hand, what you have in your hand is a debt from the Central European Bank to you. Every time you give a 10 euro banknote to someone, you are telling this person, although we don't speak these words anymore, but that's what we are doing. We are telling this person, look, the Central European Bank owes me 10 euros. I'm now going to transfer this debt to you.
And that's why also maybe the physical money, the paper money is still a bit more risk-free than the money in your online account.
It's a bit different. It's a little bit different. It has certain properties that all bank money doesn't have. I know we can get a little into that discussion, but it's more about we can talk about this later, I think, because one of the key concepts when we come to the latest evolution of money, which is Bitcoin, is censorship resistance. And that's something that cash has, while bank transfers don't have that.
So David, now we talked about this, this form of money, paper money, about central banks and banks. What do you think about inflation? Do we have too much inflation? How can currencies protect us with, or how is inflation and currencies connect to each other?
Well, when people are asked what is inflation, that's another very difficult question. Most people say, well, its price is rising. That's also not true. I'm sorry. What inflation is, it's an increase in the amount of the money supply. The increase in prices, it's the consequence. But inflation is just an increase in the money supply. Let's say you live in a abandoned island where there are only 1,000 shells, and you own 100 of those shells. Then you effectively possess 10% of the money supply. And if a boat comes tomorrow and brings 1,000 more shells, then suddenly there are 2,000 shells in this island, and the same 100 shells that you have now is worth half of the money supply, because the economic power and the productivity of this island hasn't changed. Only the money supply has changed. Therefore, generating more money without an increment in wealth and productivity implies automatically that the purchasing power of every unit is diluted, and an increase in prices is just a consequence. And what is very interesting about inflation is that it's not a natural process. Many people think, yeah, prices should increase over time. That's not true. There is actually no reason why prices should be increasing other than the extension of the money supply, because human and technological progress actually makes things easier to produce. I remember I have a very nice experience, not so nice, but interesting experience. In 2004, I bought for myself a PlayStation Portable. And back then I wanted to download games from the internet and store them in the PlayStation Portable such that I didn't have to buy them. And I went to a shop and I asked them, this was 2004. I asked them, what is the biggest SD card that you have? And they showed me like, look, this is just a new release. It's a 4 gigabyte SD card. It's the biggest you can get today in the world. It costs 98 euros, 4 gigabyte SD card. And I bought it, of course, because it would save me a lot of money downloading games. Well, guess what? Last month, I bought a 32 gigabyte, SD card, which is like 8 times bigger. And I paid only €7.99. That means I got 8 times more better product, and I paid around less than 1/10 of the price. Why? Because memory space has gotten much cheaper, because technology has enabled that. So actually, prices of goods should be getting lower as technology advances. And the only reason why prices ever increase is an inflation of the money supply. I have there is a so-called Simon Abundance Index. I can provide you the link. And it's very interesting because they price things not in monetary units, but in the amount of time a person has to work to purchase them. So imagine you work for 100 euros every hour. Then I would say buying a SD card for 10 euros is going to cost you 1/10 of an hour, 6 minutes of your time. So if you price things in time and not in euros or dollars, then we can actually see something very interesting. And that is that things have gotten much cheaper over time. For example,
I heard that this is only because we import so many products from Asia where they can produce it cheaper. But if you would produce it in Western Europe, then it would be really expensive. And as the prices are also increasing in Asia and also other parts of the world,
of course,
in the middle of the next or this decade, we will also have much higher prices again.
But that applies also to what I said, like the capability to import things from very far away. It's a technological progress.
Yes, of course. It's you also have Moore's law that you have maybe with the same price, you always get more functionality. Processors are getting faster,
exactly,
and so on and so on. So this is an example. And by the Moore's law, or by the technology and advancements, we kind of can keep prices and also get more services. It's not that we spend less, but we
exactly
buy more.
I can give you one example. According to this index that I just mentioned, a cup of coffee in 1980 compared to or better say, a cup of coffee in 2018 compared to 1980 costs in 2018 85% less in terms of working time than it was costing before. However, in monetary units, it costs more. So we are paying with less, we are buying goods with less and less amount of our time. However, we have to pay more and more monetary units. And why is that? There is really only one reason why prices are increasing, and that's the inflation of the money supply. Because the actual prices in working hours have decreased. And if money supply would stay constant, prices would continuously decrease, because prices of goods, of course, prices of human labor might increase as human labor is more demanded, but I'm talking about prices of goods that need to be produced in an industrial process. They would even stay constant or get lower because humanity progresses technologically speaking. And this brings me to my point concerning financial independence and the role the choice of your monetary form plays for that. Because nowadays, nobody comes to the idea of achieving financial independence only by accumulating cash. We know it is impossible. If you just earn a lot of money, or earn good amount of money, and you spend very little of it, and then you leave this money in your bank account forever, everybody in our community will understand you will never achieve financial independence, because you need this amount of money to grow, even if it's slowly. You need this amount. You need to invest this amount of money and have it grow year by year in order to ever having the chance of achieving financial independence. But this need, it's completely artificially created phenomena. If our monetary supply was fixed and stable, it would be possible to keep your purchasing power in the future only by accumulating cash. If a person wants to increase your purchasing power, then of course you have to invest. But the possibility to keep constant your purchasing power by holding cash has been stripped out of our hands, or is being stripped out of our hands by the inflation of the monetary supply. And that's what makes investing the difference between your income and your expense not an option, but an obligation if you want to ever achieve financial independence.
So why is this money supply increased? Because of money printing and quantitative easing, or what's the reason?
Exactly. Money printing, quantitative easing. So very short description. Money printing means that basically the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank clicks a button and says, hey, let's gonna have more euros. Quantitative easing means that they use these euros to purchase freshly created government debt. Basically, they hand over this money to the government. And fractional reserve means also that commercial banks are able to loan to their clients a multiple much higher of money than the money that other clients have deposited with them. And why they do this? Why does this happen? Basically, government have two options of financing their activities. One is taxation, which is very visible to the population and usually also very not nice. And the second one is inflation. It's the only two ways how any government can finance their activities. And if they don't want to taxate people more, then they have to print money.
And they're currently doubling down on their efforts on both fields.
Extremely, yeah.
I mean, quantitative easing now was in the beginning of Corona for the packages to rebuild the economy, and now you can also see in the governance that are being selected in the programs that they want to increase taxes, especially wealth tax is a topic. So it's not getting easier to become financial independent. Now you can you can tax free after 1 year. You can get your Bitcoin gains tax free, and also after 10 years you can sell your property tax free. And this will be, I think the ability will be removed. So I'm questioning how can people build their base for retirement, even if you want to retire with 70 or 80. It's getting harder, I would say.
Yeah, it is because basically, and these are real world data. If you go to the website of the Federal Reserve, you can search for M2 money supply. This is basically the Federal Reserve's own transparent account of how much money is in circulation in the world. And then you can see something as crazy as since March of 2020 until today, the amount of money circulating in the world has increased by 25%. 25% in just 1 year. Of all the money that was created in the whole history since end of the 19th century until March of 2020, they just printed a quarter more. And that has, of course, has an incredible impact on your savings. Many people speak, okay, what is real inflation? Real inflation means really how much purchasing power are we losing, not the consumer price index. And this is rather, there are many sources of this. I'm not going to try to pinpoint the exact number, but it's roughly something around 15%. That means you are losing 15% of your purchasing power by holding cash. Let's give this a more tangible consequence. This means that your purchasing power becomes half every 5 years. Every 5 years, you lose half of your money. Every 10 years, you lose 3/4, and so on and so on. And then you say, okay, this obviously has an incredible impact in our goal of most people in this community to ever achieve financial independence, because it's not about, our goal for financial independence is not to have a huge amount of money today. What we want is to have enough money or enough wealth to cover our expenses in the future, such that we only work if we wish to, not because we have to. But you can not do this if you are losing half of your value every 4 years.
Yeah, but that's why everybody is putting their money in their ETFs and
in something else. Exactly. Anything other than cash. Anything other than cash. And this is not an option. It's a must.